you all for coming to this year's college admissions panel. We're happy to have all of the students here and their families. And we're pleased to welcome our three lovely college admissions reps that decided to participate with us tonight. Let me just introduce them first. Tonight we have, on the end, we have Drew Carter, who is the Senior Associate Director of Admissions from the College of Holy Cross. In the middle, we have Div Kurti, the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions from UMass Amherst. And closest here on your right, we have Lauren Wilkes, the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions from Babson College. So we're very lucky to have them here tonight. We're going to start off tonight's panel with some just basic overview questions, things that apply, in the college application process that you'll all face. And then at the end of the night tonight, we'll have time for Q&A for anything we don't touch upon. Awesome. So let's start out with a question that'll go towards each school a little bit differently. How has the admissions landscape changed at your institution and in general over the past few years? Anyone want to take that first?
Hi everyone. First of all, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I think in general what we've seen at Babson College, specifically in the past few admission cycles, is, and I'm sure kind of in general this is happening too, college and admit rates are getting more and more competitive. And so what I think is really happening kind of in our committee decisions is it's not just coming down to numbers anymore. It's not just about the GPA, it's not about the test scores. We have to be extremely, I guess, nuanced in our review process. So I'm sure you guys hear a lot about kind of that holistic review process in an application, meaning we're looking at the applicant as a whole person. And I really think that that is becoming truer and truer with each set of committee meetings we have year to year. We've got to find that student that is, of course, a good academic fit, but what other fit within our community are they bringing to the table? So I think just a lot more details are happening to kind of deal with those more competitive admit rates that are coming year to year.
Hi. Yeah, so I would definitely agree with that. I think with UMass Amherst specifically, one thing that we are seeing is that while our majors that are kind of more towards the sciences are not necessarily becoming more academically competitive, they are becoming a lot more popular. So we are finding that in majors that are quite large because they are popular, things like biology, chemistry, physics, public health, these are larger programs for us because we have such an emphasis on research. But we are finding that those majors are filling up a little bit more quickly during our application process because it is becoming a little bit more competitive. But across the board, I would agree with pretty much everything that Lauren says, which just goes to show you because UMass and Babson are very, very different schools. So not too different when it comes to the paper versions of us.
And Cameron said the same thing, bigger, faster, stronger. Bigger pools, applying faster, earlier in the process, and individually stronger applicants make the pool stronger and more compressed at the top. The other only thing I would add is that families being a little bit more price conscious and thinking about financial balance to the list of schools that they're applying to, not just admissions balance.
Awesome, fantastic. Next, moving on, could you describe the application review process at your institution? For example, what do you look for on a transcript that's important?
Shall I go ahead? I guess I'll go. Okay, so at Babson, I'll go in, I guess, to a bit of detail about how we look at an application because, as I said, it is very nuanced. So the counseling staff and I, what we do is we kind of divide an applicant or an application into two sides. We have the data side of the application, we call it, and then the voice side of the application. So the data side is, as you guys may guess, numbers. So that is kind of the more academic side to your application, meaning your high school transcript and a standardized test score. We do require standardized testing, so an SAT or an ACT, but then I think while we do require that and we do definitely take that into consideration in our process, I think we are spending a bit more time diving deep into your high school transcript and the academic performance there. What the counseling staff and I do, because at Babson we are very, very internationally, globally diverse, we kind of divide up territories so that we can become the experts in that specific area, in that specific high school. So we're looking at an applicant within the context of their community. We're not kind of comparing everybody across the globe to one another. That just would not work at all. So what we do is we kind of look and see what our students are doing within the community, what's available to them. Are they taking advantage of the rigorous classes that the school offers, whether that be APs or honors or whatever the school is offering? Are they getting strong grades in that? We're looking for kind of that A- kind of average. There aren't really any specific requirements that Babson has in particular, with the exception of math preparation. As we are a business-oriented school, math prep is important to us. So we need all of our students to have pre-calc, for example, either as they're applying or they've already taken it before the time that they're applying to Babson. But then that's just kind of one side of the application. Then we, again, care just as much about kind of that voice side, which is, you know, all the other facets to your personality that don't come across as those numbers on a page do, meaning those letters of recommendation, the counselor rec, the teacher rec, your personal statement, your Babson supplemental essay, your extracurricular list, and everything like that. So we really do look at all of those things.
I would say UMass is fairly similar. So while we also break it down into two categories, we don't call it data and voice, we call it academic and holistic. It's why the application process is a little bit hard sometimes, because essentially we're usually talking about the same things and just call them totally different names for one another. So for us, the academic side is really your transcripts, your school profile, and your grades, and then your standardized test scores, whereas the holistic is your letters of rec, your extracurriculars, and your personal statement. So to just use the transcript as kind of an example, as a public and state institution, we do have to use the guidelines that are put forth by the Massachusetts Board of Higher Ed. So the first thing that we're going to be looking for are 4 years of math, 4 years of English, 3 years of lab science, and then 3 years of social studies and 2 years of foreign language, because that's what the state of Massachusetts tells us that we have to look for. And then from there, you know, again, it's pretty similar. We're looking at, you know, what is available to you at your school. Does the school offer honors and APs? Are you choosing to take those courses? Are you not choosing to? And are you bulking up in extracurriculars? We're kind of looking at the balance between those two things. So your rigor is really important, as well as your academic performance. So are you generally choosing more challenging courses and getting, you know, above average grades? Are you taking easier courses and, you know, doing really, really well in them? So we're really looking to sort of get the entire individualized context from your academics, and then use the holistic review to kind of balance that out.
I'll use different words as well, but they're going to be my words, not the Holy Cross words. We see the academic profile, and that would be what high school you attend, what courses you've signed up for, how you performed in those courses, and then perhaps standardized testing, because we're test optional. That information, that academic profile, that's the cake. Everything else in the file, recommendations, essays, interviews, activities, all those things, those are frosting. We all like to, well, we all require frosting with our cake, and we want the best frosting to complement that cake, but the cake is most important to us. We have 2 people evaluate a file, and then the file is voted on by 13 people in our admissions office, and that's how we treat everyone.
Great. Now, moving on, I know I think a couple of you touched on this a bit, but if you could just speak to the role that standardized testing plays at your institution, because as you all know, they all are a little different everywhere.
So as I said, we do require some kind of standardized test score. I think, as I said, you know, we do, I think, pay more attention to your high school transcript, your kind of academic performance in that way. However, standardized testing does play a role. I think how it plays a role is in the fact as I said, we have students coming from all over the country, all over the world that are coming to Babson. There are so many different kinds of education systems, grading systems, evaluation systems, that there's no real way, and we don't do anything like recalculate GPA or anything like that. So there's no real way to have kind of a standard baseline to look at our applicant pool as a whole. So I think we kind of, in a way, use standardized testing for that, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I don't think testing is ever going to completely ruin or completely push your application to one way or another, at Babson at least. But I think in terms of, you know, what we do within kind of the testing and what we require, like I said, we want one or the other. It doesn't matter which test you decide to submit to us, but we do want to help you as much as possible. So we do super scoring at Babson, and if you guys don't know what that is, it's as though if you take 2 SATs and you get a higher subsection in math, let's say, on the first test, but a higher verbal subsection on the second time you took the SAT, we'll just see those higher sub scores. So we do that within the SAT, we do that within the ACT as well. So if any of you are deciding to apply to Babson in your senior year, my philosophy is just send us everything you've got and we'll only see the highest. And so we try and help you in that way.
UMass is also not test optional, so we do require either the SAT or the ACT. Either one's fine. I like to put in a plug for the ACT, being from the Midwest, because it is a very different test than the SAT. Like I said, we don't really have a preference one way or another. You know, again, being a public and state institution, we do have to follow the guidelines of the state. So there are certain minimums that we can't go below for both the ACT and the SAT, and that information is available on the website for the Massachusetts Board of Higher Education. But to sort of give you an idea as to how we view standardized testing, we believe very strongly that the higher your GPA is, the more flexibility we have with your standardized testing. Because for us, we're a little bit more concerned with the work that you can do over 3 years versus the work that you can do in 3 hours. So standardized testing, still very important to us, definitely does show you know, one level of intellect or one other way of academic rigor, but it's not the most important part of the academic review for us, though it does play a part.
I was speaking on a panel years ago, and this same question came up, and this one guy answered the question about the role of standardized testing in admissions. He said, it's not as important as you think it is, but it's more important than we'll ever admit. And I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. I work at a test optional school. There are lots of schools advertising themselves as test optional these days. Your first question to a test optional school should be, what does that mean? Because while lots of us use that label, it has many different definitions. At Holy Cross, it just probably means the default, what you think it would be. It's up to the student to decide whether or not they want to submit standardized testing with their application. Some do, some don't. There's nothing you have to do in lieu of testing. We've been this way for 13 years now. If the student does not submit testing, we don't think they did poorly, we simply don't think about it. There's enough content in an application that we don't spend time thinking about information that we don't see. That's true for testing and anything else. So there are lots of test optional schools out there. There's great websites that'll provide that information, and your counselor, I think, will be a great source for you when you start to decide whether or not standardized testing is going to be a strength in your application, and if it's not going to be a strength, then maybe thinking about some schools that may not require it.
Moving on to that more holistic part you guys were talking about earlier, what advice do you have in terms of letters of recommendations from teachers? Like, who should a student ask would be a good person to ask for a letter?
It's still, okay. Sorry, I thought we had a mic issue. So I think for Babson, we require 2 letters of recommendation, one from your college counselor and the second one being from a teacher of your choice. I mean, I think the first thing you can do is get to know your college counselors well. They're here to help you and to advocate for you. So I think really having a great relationship with them can only strengthen your application in that way. And kind of going off of that point, I think choosing a teacher that knows you well or that you have a strong relationship with is a great thing to do. I don't think you should necessarily be choosing the teacher that you have an A+ in the class if you barely really speak to the teacher. You just kind of cruise through the course without really engaging with them. I think it's a much more robust letter to read if you know that you've worked closely with the teacher. They have more to say about you. In terms of kind of aside from those 2 letters of recommendation, or maybe within those 2, I feel like some of the applicants that we're seeing at Babson, sometimes they go above and beyond that 2-letter requirement. I think the most I've personally ever seen is 12, and it took a long time. And I wasn't really reading too many new things with each letter. So I think really the requirements are truly all that you need. The 2 is all I need to see. But if, let's say, you want to send a 3rd one, that is fine. I mean, I'm going to read it. My colleagues are going to read it. I would suggest, though, if you want to send that 3rd or maybe 4th letter, have it come from maybe an academic source, a teacher, but a teacher that knows you in another way too. So it could be your teacher that's also your sports coach, or your teacher that's a club advisor, something like that, so they can add another kind of layer to your application in that way and speak to you in a different way than just inside of the classroom.
To put it really simply, I would say ask someone that likes you. And I think the reason I say that is I feel like I get a lot of questions from students that are interested in majoring in something really specific. So they think, oh, you know, I want to be a physics teacher or a physics major, so I absolutely need to ask my physics teacher to write my letter of recommendation. Well, if your physics teacher hates you, it's probably not going to be the greatest letter of recommendation that I've ever read. So I think it's really important to, yes, think about, you know, what your end goal is and, you know, kind of visualize how you can get there. But also know that when we're reading these letters of recommendation, we're not necessarily saying, oh, well, they want to study physics, so why are they asking the chemistry teacher and not the physics teacher? It's not really happening like that in our brain. It's more so, you know, does this person have strong, authentic things to say about this applicant? Do they have a real relationship with the student? Can they talk about who they are, where they're coming from, how they've grown, and how they've changed, rather than, well, this is just the one thing that I taught them. So rather than get necessarily caught up in who do I ask and why am I asking, just kind of think, you know, are there people in your academic realm that, you know, have better things to say than maybe others? And are there people who know you in a specific context that you want highlighted or emphasized in the application? Those are the people you really should be asking.
Great, and then moving on to another piece that comes in the applications, extracurricular activities. How important are they, and say you're a junior who maybe hasn't gotten too involved yet, what should they do?
All I'll say about activities is that we like to read about what the student does outside the classroom. In some way, because it helps us get an idea of what they're going to be like outside of our classroom. I think it is a little bit of a misperception that colleges place weight or reward certain activities over others. That, you know, student government is better than service, or service is better than athletics, when the reality is that we want students to be involved outside the classroom, and whether that's working at CVS, whether that's, you know, cutting their grandmother's lawn, whether that's picking up and babysitting for their little brother after school, or whether that's being the president of student government. We just want to get a sense of what activities and what their involvement has been outside of the classroom, more as a way to get to know them and less as a way to judge the choices they make.
I definitely agree with that. I think that, I guess speaking to, since Babson is kind of a more specialized school, we do have a business focus in our curriculum. That is something I think that our applicants to Babson kind of trip up about. They're like, oh no, do I need to be the president of the business club in my school? Do I have to take and exhaust the business curriculum at my school? And the answer is definitely no. We at Babson, we're, you know, a small school. We're trying to build a community full of diverse individuals with completely different, diverse passions. So you don't have to kind of be the be-all and end-all business person to be a good fit at Babson or at any kind of, you know, specialized institution that maybe has a niche about, a certain niche about them. I think it's important to highlight kind of what you're passionate about, and I guess I encourage you to don't do anything just because you think it's what a college admission office is going to want to see. Do what enriches your life, honestly. And in terms of if you're not super involved yet, I would suggest trying something new, getting involved. If it's something within the school, that's great. If you want to try to get a job or volunteer, you know, there's always something to get involved with. So I think just get out there and start trying new things and see what sticks with you.
Moving on to the essay, which I know is usually a popular topic, do you have any advice on topics for an essay? And also just if you could touch upon the supplemental essays and the importance of those.
Okay. So I would say that the best essay topics that students choose are going to be the topics that mean the most to them. I would never recommend writing any essay just because you think it's what you should be writing about. I think the best essays I've ever read have been authentically true to that student. My favorite essay that I ever read was written by a young woman who lives in New Jersey and really close to the New York City border, and she wrote her essay about chickens. The first line was, "So, I really love chickens." The entire essay was about how she loves chickens so much that she actually went to her town hall and basically started a petition to change the livestock laws within her town so that she could own pet chickens. And she actually did end up getting those livestock laws changed. She now owns 3 chickens, and she actually sells the eggs to the local bakeries around her neighborhood. So that's definitely one of my favorite essays that I've ever read, just because it's very memorable and it's very weird, and just, this was my first year as an admissions person, so it just was not what I was expecting in an essay. Camp counselor, sure. Internship in Washington, D.C., definitely. Chickens, not so much. So I think what was so great about this essay is that I learned about the student's passion and I learned about her problem-solving skills. And essentially, those are kind of like the big picture things that we're trying to get from an essay. We're not necessarily trying to hear about, all the different games you played with your campers, unless that's something that's really important to you and had a profound effect on you. I think the other thing that students do is they try to choose really, really fancy topics that are gonna make them sound, kind of like their chests are puffed out a little bit. And I think that that's totally fine. I think being humble is a great life skill. It's maybe not necessarily the best thing to have in your college application. You want to brag about the things that you're doing. But at the end of the day, if you're doing it because you think you should, rather than it's something that you're legitimately proud of, that's going to come off. So I think that instead of stressing necessarily about your college essay topics, rather just choose something that you know you can talk about and is meaningful to you. And that's going to be more than enough for us, because we're really just looking for a polished example of writing that articulates your voice.
Div's anecdote is a great example, especially for this crowd, because there are more parents than students here. When that girl told her parents, "I'm writing my essay about chickens," they of course said, "No, you're not." And that's a great illustration of the point that your children will write the best essay on the topic that they want to write about. The topic that you want them to write about is guaranteed not to produce a great essay.
And I'll talk about supplements,
Yeah.
because I don't know, do either of you guys have supplements as part of your essay application? Okay, Babson does have a supplemental essay, and so I can only speak to kind of Babson, but I think probably our supplement is generally similar to maybe some other institutions. So at Babson, we have, that general comment out personal statement, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, and I want to read that chicken essay. But the Babson supplemental essay, this past year was a new prompt, kind of asking what moment, this is your moment, you're sitting, you're applying to Babson right now, what moment led you here? So it's definitely these supplements. Sometimes they can be a little quirky, but oftentimes they're nuanced and kind of specific, and they can be specific to the institution. So I think in those supplemental essays, I'm still looking for a creative voice, but I'm also looking at, for our supplement at least, your connection with the institution and kind of what specifically about Babson or about the college you're applying to, like what do you want to get out of the experience? What will you bring to the community? Things like that. So I think, being specific and kind of showing your feelings and your opinions about your connection with the institution is the best way to kind of express yourself in those supplements.
I think the only thing I would add to that, just because UMass, we do have 2 supplemental questions, but they're optional. And I hear this a lot from counselors, and you can obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most people are of the impression, you see the word optional in a college application. Does it really mean optional? Probably not. And I think that that's a really hard way to look at it, because if you're just thinking like I either have to answer it or I don't have to answer it, it doesn't give you a ton of growth to really think about what that question actually is. So our optional questions at UMass are why UMass and why your specific major. They're not necessarily the most difficult questions to answer, but they do take time. So typically the students we see who are not answering those questions are doing it because they don't want to. And if that's the case, we're not necessarily penalizing them for it, but the best way I can put it is if you see something is optional in your application, rather than thinking about, do I really have to do it, thinking about instead, what other information can I give about myself through answering this question? Because the more information you actually give us, the better we can understand you as an applicant rather than just an application. I think that that's a better way to think about optional questions when you are going through this process and you are seeing optional supplements.
Awesome, and pretty spot on advice too when I get seniors who are like, do I have to answer the supplemental questions? Right there. Moving on, common application is a term I'm sure you've heard ad nauseum over the past few months. Could we talk a little bit about what the common application is and when should students get started on it?
The common application is sort of a core piece of an application that 700?
Yeah, probably about by now.
Or more, 700 or more colleges and universities in the U.S. will accept. And colleges have the option to sort of personalize that common application by adding an addition. What you've heard mostly is about supplemental questions that could be at the end. So in most cases, the student will complete the common application, and that's going to include biographic, demographic information about your high school, your activities, and then the main essay. Most schools, not all, most schools will then have additional questions that they would ask that would be personalized for that college. It might be supplementary essays, it might just be a few yes or no questions. But the good news is 90% of that application is common and can be submitted to 700 colleges in the US, but please don't send them to all 700. I think, is it still available on August 1st?
Yes, I believe you could open an account now, actually. Yeah, they pushed that up.
Yeah. So you will only have more time over the summer than you will during your senior fall. So I think at least getting the sort of the busy work, 2/3 of the common application is just busy work. It's finding out where your parents went to college, what year they graduated, what their email address is, your +4 zip code. It's just a bunch of busy work that is best done, frankly, over the summer rather than during September when you're trying to do homework as well. So at least just getting that core part and then getting a couple tries at that essay, a couple drafts of that essay over the summer is a great idea because you're not going to have more time in the fall than you do in the summer.
Sure. Awesome. Moving away a little bit from the direct application, could you guys explain the significance of visiting colleges with either tours, info sessions, maybe interviews if your institution offers them?
So I think it does definitely probably vary institution to institution, of course. But at Babson, actually part of our application review process, we do take demonstrated interest into consideration in our application process. So what that means is we track every time you come to visit, you come to do an interview, you come to one of our open house preview days or to another similar kind of event. We obviously are taking attendance in our registration list, and so it goes kind of into your file, all of the things that you have done. I'm not saying that you need to come to every event that we throw. That would be, I think, a little redundant. But I think it's important to visit. I'm going to be honest, sometimes I get sad when I do see an application from Newton North and you guys are about 20 minutes away from Babson's campus in Wellesley and you guys never came to visit. And I'm like, come see me. Come on, I want to see you on campus. So I think it's important to engage with the campus for your own personal benefit too. You guys are so lucky in the fact that where you are situated in this town in Massachusetts, you have access to pretty much almost every kind of college. And so I know that not all of you are going to be interested in Babson by any means, I get that. But you have the opportunity to visit kind of larger public institutions, small private institutions, more specialized institutions. They're all kind of in the greater Boston area and those suburbs. So I think that during your college visits process, just kind of go out and look at everything. and kind of get a sense for what is the kind of fit you would like for your college experience. But then when it comes down to maybe deciding which colleges you are more interested in and you think you do want to apply to, definitely go take that tour. Listen in on that info session if it fits with your schedule. And also pay attention to what other offerings that institution may have. Can you sit on classes? Can you meet with a student in some way? Babson, for example, also does have interviews as part of our application process. They're certainly not required, they're totally optional, but I always think it's wonderful to see a student do it. I think it only adds another great layer to your application. So, for example, you guys are even welcome to come interview if you're interested in Babson right now. We'll have interviews all throughout the rest of the school year, through the summer, into November on campus. So even before you decide to even apply, if you apply, it goes straight into your application. So I'm kind of in the sense of why not? If you're college searching, just kind of get out there and see what sticks with you, what you connect with, honestly.
Awesome. Moving on a little bit, if you could talk a little about the difference between early decision, early action, which your school institutes, and maybe if a student's thinking about applying early, what maybe they should get going on now.
So UMass Amherst, we offer early action and regular decision. And essentially early action and early decision differ in that early decision is binding. So essentially what that means is that if you apply by the early decision deadline, you've basically told that institution, I'm super interested, I'm applying early, and if you let me in, girl, I will be there. And for UMass Amherst, we don't offer that. We offer early action, which is essentially your way of saying, you know what, I'm a little bit interested in UMass, I'm gonna apply early, and if I get in, I might be there, we'll see. So the reason that we do early action rather than early decision is that, we don't want to create a binding contract. We are a public state institution, and about 2/3 of the state of Massachusetts will apply to UMass Amherst, so we're not asking them all to commit right away. But essentially the biggest difference between us, our early action deadline and our regular decision deadline is, do you want us to see your senior year grades right away, or are you okay with waiting until after you've been admitted into the university for us to see those? So students who apply early action to UMass Amherst, the deadline's November 1st. So essentially, it's too early for your senior year grades to be available. So the students I say who should be applying early action are gonna be those students who feel really confident and comfortable with where their grades end by the end of junior year. Because they're essentially thinking, their grades aren't going to change too much during senior year. They're not relying on those grades making or breaking their application. They don't think too much is going to change. And if that's the case, I think go ahead. I think if you're someone who, freshman year was a little bit rough, maybe junior year, the stress of all of those, APs, standardized testing was maybe a little bit too much. Maybe a family member got sick and your grades took a little bit of dip. Anything that creates any sort of fluctuation in your grades that you're worried about. If you really want to show those senior year grades, you're on an upward trend, you're doing better than you have been, waiting until regular decision is probably the best option for a school like UMass Amherst, because we will wait for those senior year grades to add them to your application, and they will strengthen your application. But if you're not so concerned about it, it's not that big of a deal to us, one way or another. But every school is different. Some schools have early action deadlines that are pursuant to what you're planning on studying. So if you want a specific major, you have to apply by a certain deadline. If you're interested in an honors program or a merit-based scholarship, maybe there might be a different deadline that you have to apply for. So for each individual school, it is important to kind of look into that. But at the basis of it, early action versus early decision, decide, it's binding.
Awesome. So as juniors who are going to be seniors in only just a couple months, what advice would you give to them as what should they be doing, focusing on for the next upcoming summer months?
I'll just say a word about visiting. I bought my first grown-up couch a while back, and I remember the experience of going into my first furniture store. And I don't really ever had couches I got from Craigslist and stuff like that. And I walked into this grown-up furniture store, and I was attacked by salespeople. And they asked me what I was there for. I said, a couch, obviously. And they said, well, what kind? And I just kind of thought there was going to be a big room of couches they would point me to, and I would just get to sit on them and pick the one I liked. I didn't know that there were kinds of couches, or even like which. I had no idea I was going to be asked so many questions. By the time I got to the 9th furniture store or the 10th furniture store, when I walked in, they said, "What are you here for?" And I said, "The couch." And they said, "What kind?" I said, "Well, 94 inches." And I wanted the chaise vertical option. I wanted extra cushion. I wanted corduroy. And I wanted. And the only reason I knew any of that information was because I'd been willing to just be kind of clueless and sit on a ton of couches and ask lots of questions. I think we ask our high school juniors too many questions about college early in the process, kind of like I was asked at that first furniture store. All I knew was that I liked the couch I kind of had now, and I kind of wanted to buy a new one, but I didn't know anything. I didn't know how I was going to fit with any of those couches. I just had to go sit on couches. I think parents get so frustrated because their children won't answer their questions that they have for them about college, and they shut down these conversations, but they've never bought a couch before, right? They've never picked a college. They don't understand what big, medium, and small really mean. So visit. Get out there, go see them. The best college to visit first is the first college to visit. The best college to visit second is the second college to visit. I don't think you need to be picky early on. I think the more couches you sit on, the better perspective you get, the more savvy you get, and the better prepared you'll be to answer questions later in the process that you parents will be firing at them. Will you be holding off on that?
All right, that's a perfect way to, metaphor I've never heard, but that's perfect. Something we haven't talked about much tonight that we should touch on a little bit, financial aid, obviously a huge piece to this process. Any general financial aid advice when it comes to the FAFSA and any impact with the October 1st FAFSA opening that's been new in recent years?
Let's see. I think just in terms of, I guess it's important to find out kind of what each college needs when you are wanting to be considered for financial aid, and kind of seeing how each institution deals with that. Some institutions are need blind, like Babson, where they won't take financial need into consideration in your application process. Some colleges say that they will meet 100% of demonstrated financial need. Some will not say that. It's kind of, there's so many kind of different nuances, so I think, asking the questions of each institution's financial aid office. I know Babson's office is very accessible for prospective students and applicants, so if there's anything that's confusing to you, always reaching out. I think also going on each institution's website and using those net price calculators that you will see on everyone's. I know that it seems weird, but just do it, just try it out. And I think some institutions, I know Babson just rolled out this new program called My Intuition, where it's so easy. It is like 3 minutes of your time, 6 steps. I consider myself not the best person in finance, ironically working at a business school, but I even could figure it out. So I think just kind of play around and kind of see what your package may or may look like at certain institutions, using those calculators to kind of get a better picture of what you're looking at financially moving forward. I also think just kind of meeting in terms of the prior year data and everything, meeting those kind of suggested deadlines, we were able, with that kind of new timeline, we were able to give financial aid packages to students kind of in the early decision, early action notification periods, which was pretty special. So I think just meeting those deadlines so you don't have to get your decision, then wait on a package to kind of make your final decision whether it will work for you or not.
I'll just put a quick plug in for MIFA, Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. They have an awesome website with great advice, articles, blogs, tips, financing advice. It's a great website and a great resource. Really skilled professionals who have a sense about financing higher ed. It's a great free resource. MIFA.org.
Great, and I have to second Drew's opinion there. MIFA, they do fantastic work and are a great resource. Moving on, any students who may be applying to college that have learning disabilities, do you have any advice on any additional pieces of the application process they should pay attention to?
I would say that for students that have documented learning differences and are applying to state institutions, we will waive your standardized testing requirement. So if you do have a documented learning difference or disability, make sure that you have that documentation and that you're adding it to your Common App. Because once we have that documentation, we can go ahead and pretend like we didn't see your standardized testing score. And that can really come as officially as you need it to be, whether that's coming from a doctor. And I've even actually had, college counselors and guidance counselors emailing me and just saying, this is a student who has, this learning difference, and this is the documentation, and that's good enough for us. So even if it is just coming from someone in the school, as long as we have some sort of documentation, we can waive that information. But outside of that, other than that, we're not really reading the application too differently. But it is part of your individualized context, so make sure that you're including it.
Great. So moving on now, I'd like to offer the opportunity for anyone in the audience who has any specific questions, maybe about something we didn't touch on. Feel free to raise your hand. We can find you in the red bit.
Yes. So you guys were talking about how there's certain degrees in business and sciences that are getting really, really competitive nowadays. Would you consider something in a film major or maybe like a liberal arts major? You think that would be more competitive because there are fewer spots for them because they're not popular courses, or would they have more spots because they're not as popular as the other courses?
That's a great question. I think, we sort of failed to mention early on that some schools will require you to state your intended area of study in the application, and that will be tied to your admission status. Other schools are going to give you the opportunity to declare an intended area of study while still giving you the opportunity to be undecided. And then there's a third family of schools that are going to say, you can't tell us anything, we're going to ignore, everybody comes in undeclared. So there's lots of options there. And as far as whether you're driven towards the humanities or a more specialized program, at Emerson, they would say we have lots of spaces for film studies. And at other schools, they would say, well, you can figure that out when you're enrolled, and other schools might have smaller enrollment in those programs. So I think there's lots of options out there, and those are really good questions to ask of an individual college, whether it's of a rep who visits the school, or whether you're there for an information session, or just over email. That's a really simple email you could send to 8 different colleges that you think you might be interested in, and see what their responses are.
Great. Any other questions? Right here. To repeat the question for anyone who couldn't hear, the question was in terms of foreign language requirements, does it have to be consecutively? For example, if a student took Spanish 2 sophomore year and then maybe didn't take a language for whatever reason junior year and then picked it back up senior year.
For the state requirements, it doesn't necessarily have to be consecutive. We just have to see the 2 years on the transcript. But again, I would also imagine it would depend on what you're planning on majoring. If you're taking Spanish 2 your freshman year and then not again until your senior year, but you want to be a Spanish major, I might imagine that might look a little weird. But for the state requirements, it's not a problem.
Nice. Any other questions right here in the middle?
I loved your couch analogy, and I'm going to use it. So what happens when you go sit on 20 couches and you're like, I still don't know what I want? Do you have any suggestion for kids like that? Because I think it matters a lot between the boys and the girls. The boys seem to be like, I'm going to college, I'll go someplace, whereas the girls seem a little bit better organized and all that stuff. Generally, do you have suggestions? Or?
So we're sending out right now, every college sends out some version of this thing called ASQ, which is the Admitted Student Questionnaire. It's this questionnaire you send to every student that was admitted to your college each year, regardless of whether or not they're going to enroll. It's good data for us. Our favorite question on one of those questionnaires questionnaires is the students who are choosing to enroll in our school. There's about 40 questions, but the one we really want, what made you decide, right? What was the tipping point for you? We're really interested in that answer every year because, shoot, whatever the leading answer is, that's what we want on the website, that's what we want on our view books, whatever it is. Multiple choice, intended area of study, academic reputation, distance from home, financial aid award, family legacy. There's like 4 or 5 others. We often share the data from this questionnaire in aggregate with a bunch of our peer schools. Essentially, the answer is the same at all of our schools. And essentially, the runaway answer every year is the feeling I got when I was on campus. And I think it's really good to absorb the data. It's really good to absorb reviews online. It's really good to absorb our kind of boring information sessions. But in the end, August 28th, 2019, that would be, right? That's like move-in day. If your son or daughter's a current junior right now, right? August 28th. The only thing that will matter to them at that point is what it feels like in their stomach, what it feels like to be there. In the end, I think when students trust their gut, they won't be wrong.
I would just add to that, you know, I was one of those people. For those of you that were at the Transitioning Together meeting, you heard about this. I sat on all the couches and was like, do I really want a couch? So sometimes really what it comes down to is seeing something that you absolutely know you do not want, to then go back and reassess all the other things that you've gone to. So I think that, you know, it's important to go and try all the couches, but I think if you might want to try an ottoman or a lazy boy, you know, those are all great options as well. But once you see them and sit on them, you may realize, well, I've been looking at this the entirely wrong way. And so I think it's, you know, the summer is a great time to go and sit on couches, but you have until May 1st to sit on all of the couches and ottomans and lazy boys. So there's no real reason to rush that just yet.
I will say, like, especially in the last couple of weeks, we've seen these students with all this anxiety. Like, I like 6 schools I was admitted to. You want to say, like, boy, first world problems, right?
You were admitted to 6 schools?
Yeah, and you like them all. And I think so often, especially early in the process, right, students are driven to, do you want a big school or a small school? Like, it's binary. Well, for some students, the answer could be, well, I'd be happy at a big school or a small school. I'd be happy at a school close to home or far from home. And like that was me. I knew I was going to make my happiness. And to me, whether I chose that school or this school or that school, it honestly did not make a huge difference to me because I knew I was going to be happy at most places. Now, that's not true for everybody. That certainly doesn't make me better or worse. That made me more filled with anxiety. But the truth is, like, if you find yourself equally drawn to many schools, that means you understand that you're going to make your happiness and you'll be happy at those places.
Great, and right over here in the white,
What's your perspective on gap years?
a question for anyone in the back was just thoughts on a gap year.
Increasingly common, increasingly popular. Colleges tend to like them these days. But you want to apply to college while you're in high school, except for rare circumstances. You want to apply while you're in high school. You want to have your application be accepted. You want to hold a spot, usually at most schools depositing, and then requesting a deferral for a year. Some schools have different processes, whether you have to do that in writing to justify what you're going to do, but it's more common now than uncommon.
I would say that for most students, the best way to kind of go about it is to decide whether or not you want to do a gap year during the application process so that it's not getting to, you know, I was admitted and it's, you know, August 27th and, oh man, I want to go to Israel. You know, like, great, that's what winter break's for. So I definitely think having that in your head before you kind of go through the whole process or while you're in the process is the best way to approach it. But I can't really think of too many institutions that are like, no gap years, not whatsoever. I don't think too many institutions feel super negatively about them like that.
There's a lot of data to suggest that students who do gap years have higher GPAs than if they had not done it.
Any other questions? Right here in the front.
As far as the GPA, so you count for the GPA or unweighted GPA. Also, when you
So the question for anyone who couldn't hear was the weighted versus the unweighted GPA in terms of the admissions process, and then do they take what the school gives, or do they recalculate?
I honestly think this probably depends school to school as to how they do that. I know some institutions do recalculate, some only look at weighted, some only look at unweighted. At Babson, we kind of, I guess, we don't really look at the GPA number per se, truly. We're looking kind of at the grades in themselves as a whole. So I guess that would be unweighted since they're just grades on a page. And then we're looking to see kind of the courses taken and the rigor within that course load. So I guess we're looking at unweighted, but we're not really looking at the GPA number specifically, like I said. But some schools would be doing that.
For UMass Amherst, we do not look at the GPA that's offered by the high school, no matter what school it is, and we do recalculate every student's GPA. And essentially, again, this is just per the Massachusetts Board of Higher Ed. So essentially, we're looking at the letter grades and then reassigning point values to that on the UMass scale. And we use kind of just the letter grades based off of the transcript, but we do add weight to those grades based on what the school says is honors or AP. So we use a weighted GPA, but it's not the weighted GPA that the school gives to us. And I'm sure if we asked the Massachusetts Board of Higher Ed, they could find 1,000 ways to make that much more complicated than it already is. But it is public information, and if you wanted to go on their website, it's just mass.edu. They do have a grade point average calculator on there as well.
Any other questions? Again, in the red?
Got the red shirt. What is the role of summer college programs like hold in an application to a college? Like I applied for a summer college program in Savannah and I got accepted, and would that like slightly increase my chances of getting into the college, or would not really matter in general?
Did you say Savannah?
Yes.
As somebody from Georgia, you should definitely go. But no, I think the philosophy of summer programs is that they're kind of, it's a trend that I feel like a lot of students feel the need that they need to do that to kind of boost their application. I feel as though it's, at least in the Babson applicant pool, summer programs, I see them every now and then, but they're very few and far between. I don't think there should be any pressure to do it just because you think that's gonna help you get into college. By any means. If it's something that you think you're passionate about, you want to have that experience and you're super excited about it, for sure go. Especially if your family can make it work financially, all of that. But if it's going to cause any hardship on your family, if you're not really that excited about the program, you just think you're kind of going through the motions and doing it just to do it, then I would advise against it. I would spend the summer sitting on couches and doing something that you're actually passionate about.
I would agree with that. I am a big fan of summer programs just because I know how I spent my summers as a younger person, and they were not productive. So I think that they are a great use of time. The only time I really see it being super beneficial to students that are applying to UMass is if they've gone to a summer program that's very, very specific to what it is that they want to study. Like a lot of our architecture students will come for our summer architecture program, meet a professor that they then want to do architecture type things with, and then apply to our program. But then again, it's not necessarily making them more likely to get into that program as much as it, because I'm not there, I don't know what that program is like as someone reading an application, but it gives me some insight into, okay, architecture is something that this student is really, really passionate about and interested in. So even if that program's not at UMass, if it's at another school, it does give some insight into how the student wants to spend their time, but it's not necessarily going to be the reason why they were admitted into that program. We kind of view summer programs the same way that we view extracurriculars. Great use of your time, and I think if you can make it work for your schedule and your family financially, it can be a great option. But again, it is kind of like an extracurricular. It's not something that's necessarily going to be the reason why you were admitted or not admitted into a specific program.
In the back?
Yeah, I know that some state schools are feeling increasing pressure to admit more out-of-state students because
that's a great question. So for those of you who may not have heard, the question was just about state institutions and the pressure we may or may not be feeling to admit more out-of-state students to increase revenue. And obviously, I can't really speak for any other state institution. I'm UMass strong. I went there and love it and still work there. I know for us, it really hasn't affected us too much. Our numbers really haven't changed. When I started at UMass as a student in 2012, we were about 1/3 out-of-state, 2/3 in-state. And this upcoming year, the class that we've admitted is about 2/3 in-state, 1/3 out-of-state. So really not too much has changed.
Any other questions out there? Oh, we got one over here.
So we heard from Holy Cross about what juniors should be doing now or spending the summer, so I'd appreciate more perspective on what else juniors might be doing over the summer and thinking about.
Sure. So, I mean, again, those of you who were at the Transitioning Together meeting beforehand, you heard how I spent the summer after my junior year, which was recovering from mono. So that's what I did, and still somehow made my way into college. I'm just kidding. In all honesty, I think that most juniors should spend the summer preparing themselves in whatever way they feel like they might need to. Whether that's someone who has no idea what school they want to go to and it's completely overwhelming and maybe they're just not ready to start those visits yet. You know, again, you have some time. Take the time and relax and kind of start that search when it feels right to you. So I would say that, you know, definitely sitting on the couches, great thing to do. But if you're not ready for that, then, you know, maybe just look at IKEA.com. You know, just start browsing on the internet in that way. If you're someone who knows exactly what it is that you want to do, then maybe spend the summer kind of strengthening your application, getting a couple drafts of that essay under your belt. You know, maybe focus more on the parts of your application that you're most nervous about, whether that's, you know, creating a game plan for, you know, that first semester of senior year, studying more for your standardized testing, building those relationships to get strong letters of recommendation. I really do think that that summer before senior year should be equal parts play and equal parts preparedness, because everyone kind of starts off on a different foot, everyone comes in on different pages, and not everyone's going to have the same needs. And that's definitely going to vary even more when you think about all the different types of schools that you might be applying for. There's no way to be prepared for all of it. So just kind of taking the time to sort of view that in a simple way and kind of take it in the way you need to, I think that that's honestly the best use of time. But I'm from Western Mass, right? So we're a little bit more lax over there.
I agree with that. I think in terms of kind of aside from maybe the college search piece, and then kind of, I feel like there's sometimes pressure of that summer between junior and senior year to do something specific to really up your resume or your extracurriculars, be it a summer program or be it an internship or whatever kind of experience. I see a lot of questions from applicants, you know, do I need to have that internship, especially because we are kind of a business-oriented school, you know, that kind of internship question is going to come up, I think, more often than not. And my answer is always no. I think you should be spending the summer kind of just gaining experiences in whatever way is available to you. You know, some families love to travel during the summer. Some students need to work full-time all summer. Some students want to volunteer and have time to do that. Some want to play, you know, a club sport over, you know, like a summer league kind of sport over those months. I really don't think there's like one specific thing a student should or should not be doing, I guess, except for actually literally sitting on a couch doing nothing. That would be wasteful. Not the metaphor couch, the actual literal couch. But I think just doing whatever will enrich you as an individual, whatever that may be. There is no one like perfect thing you can be doing over that summer.
Any other questions for our panelists right here?
I just had two. One was, do you have any advice on what to do when you're visiting, like sort of what the best days are, to get kind of that feel for the institution? And then also, can you speak a little bit about how athletics plays into the process for student athletes, and what, you know, kind of what's involved in that?
So just to repeat for anyone who may not have heard, the first question is what should a student look for on a college visit? How should you approach that? And the second was about student athletes and that effect on the application process.
I'll say a bit about visits to campus. I think it's, well, every school now has great information available on their website about a visit to an admissions visit to their college campus, whether that might include a tour, information session. Some schools you could meet a student for lunch. There's a lot of variety of things. Great information online. Lots of schools ask, if not require, sign up ahead of time. So that's good to think about. That's been a big change in the last 5 years. You go to some schools and you haven't signed up ahead of time, you may get shut out of the tour. So it's not just important to see what they offer online, but in some cases it's important to sign up online and to look at where you should go for these admissions experiences. At some schools you don't go to the admissions office for the admissions tour. You might go to the welcome center. So paying attention to that. I also think the admissions experience is worthy, tours and information sessions. I also think it's really nice, if not important, to spend time away from admissions. And that can be personalized for each student. If the student's really interested in music, maybe they just go spend some time in the Performing Arts Center. At the very least, by default, the fallback is just find that student union, find that student center, find the coffee shop in there, and spend 15 or 20 minutes just experiencing that space. It's then when you sort of kind of decelerate the visit. That's when you see the way students talk to each other. That's when you see the advertisements for the activities that weekend. That's when you see the copy of the student newspaper, which is way more insightful than the admissions view book. So finding that space on campus, I think it's best after the admissions experience, after the tour, to spend a little time just as a family, just alone. Sometimes I've seen families split up. You know, the son will go to the Performing Arts Center, and the parents will go to the student center. I think that's great as well. But I think you really have to budget that time in, to spend time away from the admissions experience. And to budget that in, plan for it, because often that little 20, 25-minute experience away from admissions can really be what you remember about that visit to school.
I was a tour guide at UMass when I was a student, and I always used to end every one of my tours by encouraging the families to, obviously walk around campus, maybe check out some of the buildings that we didn't go into. But the one thing that I would always push is going to sound kind of goofy, but I would always encourage them to look at all the bulletin boards around campus. And the reason I say that is, there's going to be some sort of feeling that you get when you set foot on campus. Hopefully it's a good feeling, but it's going to be in your gut. But if you're really looking to sort of understand how the students spend their time and how they advertise their time, right? You're going to see that on the bulletin boards. You're going to see what events are coming to that campus. You're going to see what the student organizations are doing and are advertising. It's going to really give you a good idea of not just how students actually spend their time on campus and the great things that they say that they do, but it's also going to show you what they want other students to know about them on that campus as well. So that's always the one thing that I kind of missed out on, because I didn't really go on too many school tours when I was in high school. But I feel like that's just a really great way to sort of understand what's important to the students there outside of just academics, and to actually get a good visual representation of it. So whether that's in the academic buildings or in the campus center, student union, the coffee shop, wherever that might be. That is one thing that I always encourage people to zone in on, because if it's important enough for someone to tack it on a bulletin board, it's probably pretty important to the campus too.
I agree with all of that. The dining hall also is an excellent place, and then you get some lunch too. But I can answer, at least from what I know about Babson's kind of athletic recruitment process and what you can do kind of as a prospective student or even an applicant. So Babson's Division III varsity athletics, so not quite sure what it would look like in Division I specifically, but I know that our varsity coaches, if a student's interested in kind of going through that recruitment process or wanting to get more information about kind of what it would be like to be a varsity student athlete on Babson's campus, they're so accessible. They give out their emails to any prospective student that walks through the door. So you could get that process. You could start talking to a coach as early as now, sure. So That being said, sometimes when students come to visit our campus, they'll go on an admission tour, they'll sit in an info session, and then they're going to our athletic center to meet with one of the coaches to talk kind of face to face. And then sometimes our coaches, I'm actually on the athletic committee in the admission office, so I'm a liaison for a couple sports, so I know like the volleyball coach, if a student athlete, prospective student's coming onto campus, he'll have some current volleyball players come and meet the student. I think it's very nuanced, what is available, but at least kind of a one-on-one meeting, if schedules permit, usually can happen. So things like that to always look into before you're stepping foot on a campus if athletics are important too.
And from a Division I perspective, just because UMass is a Division I school, I would say that for us, it is really, really important for the student to meet the coach, mostly because that's really the only way that they're going to get onto the varsity team. So I would say that starting sophomore, junior year, you definitely want to make sure that you're speaking to your own coach at the high school level to make sure that they know that this is an interest that you have. Because a lot of the times they will be in contact with the coaches and be pretty realistic with you about what the chances are. And then from an application standpoint, we do have one person in our office who reviews all of the recruited athletic students. I'm not that person, so I'm not totally sure as to all the boxes that need to be checked in order for that person to enroll at UMass. But I do know that there is a lot of dialogue that happens between that person and the actual coach of the team as well. So I would imagine that there are some slight nuances, to kind of use your word, in that application reading as well.
Awesome. Any other questions? Right over here.
Oh, yeah, I'm just wondering if any of your schools have art or graphic design majors, and so what the process is for submitting portfolios and admissions. Speak to that.
Yeah, so for UMass Amherst, we have art and architecture. And those are our two art majors that require portfolios. And we use SlideRoom, which is a Common App affiliate website. And essentially, when you fill out your Common application saying that you're interested in either one of those two majors, it will ask you to create a SlideRoom account so that you can upload your portfolio digitally. It is the actual art and architecture departments that are reviewing your application, your portfolio, and then the academic and holistic review is completed by the actual office. So it is twofold. And then art and dance are very similar, but rather than uploading a portfolio, you have to schedule an on-campus audition, unless you're from like Alaska, at which case you could probably send in a tape and that would probably be fine. But outside of that, the review is pretty much done by the departments for those four majors specifically. But those are the only four that have direct say in those majors.
Any other questions? I think that might be it, and that about wraps up our panel tonight. If we could give a round of applause to our panelists here who have raised us up a big time. So thank you all for coming out tonight. We appreciate you coming and listening to the